Hello. So today I want to talk about the very important subject of boundaries in a relationship. We all have used our sense of boundaries to protect ourselves in a relationship and to let the other person know which portions of us are off limits and which portions are okay to open up in a relationship. So boundaries are like the dressing around our heart to protect us. And because boundaries come up as a result of our feelings being hurt or violated, I prefer to refer to boundaries as emotional standards. When we use the word boundary, it has a sense of solidity to it, a sense of fencing around it. So meaning it's a very stable, solid thing that cannot budge. And therefore, when I use the word emotional standard, there's a little bit more fluidity around the word. And so we're going to get to that, why I do what I do during the course of this video. But let's look at why boundaries even happen. Typically, when we are children and when we explore what we can and cannot do with our primary caregivers, they give us feedback which says, you're allowed to do this, whereas you're not allowed to do this. And any time this happens, we get a little bit of a pushback into our emotional world, and we kind of curl up inside as children, and we look at why couldn't we do what we wanted to do without any restrictions. And even the best of parents have to give us some boundaries, but the best of parents know how to encourage us to go beyond in some situations so that we develop a strong sense of self. But with certain other parents, especially in certain cultures like Asian cultures, even in Indian culture, which is where I grew up, the sense of self is not something that is actually promoted in a lot of ways. You kind of have more of a leaning toward societal and cultural expectations and doing things to support the family and the society. So as a result of that, what happens is some people have, you can call it loose set of boundaries, and I'm going to get to what that loose set of boundaries is in just a moment. This is not exclusive to Asian culture, of course, or Indian culture. It also happens in Western culture where people are given a set of boundaries to operate within. You can call it a set of emotional standards to operate within. For example, men are taught not to express a lot of emotion. That is kind of a boundary that Western society places on men. Similarly, women are taught in the Asian and Indian subcultures that it's not okay to dress a certain way or to say a certain things in society. So these are subcultural and cultural boundaries, familiar boundaries that get installed in us as kids. And when these boundaries get installed, our sense of self does not have an opportunity to sometimes fully develop. We don't have a strong sense of who we are and how to actually manage our own energies, how to manage our emotional world. And so the struggle that happens for a lot of people who don't grow up with a strong sense of self is whether they should accede to somebody else's way of living or whether they should promote their own way of living. So it becomes like a contention of how to live life rather than something that they directly understand and want and know that they want. So So you may say that in that sense, some people don't have a strong sense of boundaries. And again, like I said, I'm going to get to that in a minute. What I'd encourage you to instead do is to look at boundaries as emotional standards, because really typically why boundaries come up is when we go within our emotional world and we say, this is not okay, or this is okay. That's what an emotional boundary or wall is. We can have all kinds of boundaries, like physical boundaries, spiritual boundaries. But when I'm talking about relationship, I'm mainly concerned with emotional boundaries. And so when we look at emotional boundaries, there's a sense of, yes, this can be something that is okay with me in a relationship, and this is not okay with me in a relationship. Let me give you an example. So you have been seeing this man, or you're partnered or coupled with this man, and he has a habit of checking his cell phone when you are at the dining table. Perhaps in your household, you were taught that having a cell phone at the dining table is distracted eating, and therefore is to be avoided at all costs. So now this is the template you've absorbed, and you've taken it to mean that everybody is attentive to each other when dinner's happening and nobody has his cell phone. So now you're in a relationship with this man, and you basically overlay or project your sense of boundary to him and say, I do not want you to have your cell phone when you are at the dining table. Now, every boundary has a sense of yes and no attached to it. This is what I want you to start seeing in order to really understand what a boundary is. So the sense of no in this case, for example, when somebody says that it's not okay to have the cell phone, that's a strong sense of no to having the cell phone at the dining table. But this other person, this man that you are with, may have grown up with a sense of you can have your freedom to do what you want to do at the dining table, and it's not to be questioned. So for him, having the cell phone might not be such a big deal. So he is a yes to having the cell phone, and you are a no to having the cell phone. And if your sense of self is not clear, and if it's impacted by the person that you're partnered with having his cell phone at the dining table, then you're potentially going to have a reaction to him having the cell phone, and you're going to say something to him. And then on the other side, his sense of self around a cell phone is it's okay. So he is going to say, he's going to show you that he has a strong sense of self, and he's going to say, I'm not going to oblige, or this is that won't work for him. So now you butt heads, right? And it's like, where do we go from here? So this is very common in a relationship, that one person's boundary actually comes up as a problem. But what I want you to recognize is that the boundary has two sides, and that you have your boundary and he has his boundary. And that's why the problem is up. So again, it is, saying yes to something when you're saying no. Now within you, you're also saying yes to something when you're saying no to something else. So in this case, if you are saying no to having the cell phone at the dining table, what you're saying yes to is perhaps connection at the dining table when you're having a meal together, or perhaps focused attention when you're talking to each other, something along those lines. So you're saying yes to something, and because you have a sense of self around that piece, you're saying no to something that your partner is doing or your friend is doing, the person you're in relationship with is doing. So now you can see how you have two sides to the coin, and both sides have a sense of self attached to the situation in a different way. That is what is causing the contention in the situation. So how do you navigate this situation in a relationship? First and foremost, we want to get in the habit of looking at what are our beliefs that are coming up that we are projecting or overlaying on this other person. Because a relationship is an opportunity for us to expand our thinking and our feeling bodies. A relationship is a space in which we are taking another as part of ourselves, or within ourselves, you may say. And so if you're taking another as part of ourselves and within ourselves, then what a relationship is really asking us to do is to look at broadening our perspective. And if we're broadening our perspective, then there is an inclusion of the other person's opinion, feelings, and judgments into our world, just as there's an inclusion of your judgments, opinions, feelings into their world. So what that really means is that your belief shift has to be that the sense of self that you have is not just coming up from what you have learned so far, but your sense of self increases as you gain perspectives from people around you, people that you're in relationship with. So this mindset is actually a game changer, because we start to actually open our hearts to the people around us. We start to realize that everybody is inside of us and we are in everybody. They're reflections of each other. So the belief shift is that your sense of self is not always coming from what you have previously learned. It's also coming from the now and from the relationships that you are in currently. So you're constantly changing your sense of self. It is not a solidified once-in-a-lifetime process. But that doesn't mean that what you're expecting or wanting when you're at the dining table is incorrect or wrong. There is something of growth for your partner as well, to realize that there is a need on your side to be seen that way. So what you can now do with this dynamic is both of you can see the opportunity for growth in the equation. And intimacy is truly about both of you becoming closer and more vulnerable with each other, more flexible with each other. So in order to develop the intimacy in a relationship, we start to develop the habit of saying, I will honor the other side as much as the other side honors me. So it's a give and take. So that means we are in a fair partnership or fair exchange situation, rather than in a situation of imposing our views directly onto someone. So you may then soften the lines of the boundary and say something along the lines of, perhaps we can chat for 5 minutes, and then perhaps we can look at something together on your phone, or you're more than welcome to do it on your own. So that can you see the difference? Can you feel the difference between that hard-lined, do it my way or else, and the other one, which is more of a, I honor what your boundary is, how you might have seen this, and I'm willing to be a little bit more flexible with that. And that's the point that we want to get to. And that's this is great, right? Because we can do this with things that are not deep wounds within us. It's relatively easy for us to do this. But what about those areas where we are deep? How do we get to deal with our boundaries or our emotional standards in a way that is honoring of both sides? I think the beautiful thing about a relationship is that when we can understand, know with certainty what is our responsibility to take ownership on in a relationship, we can actually now turn a little inward and get very transparent and honest with ourselves and say, in this moment, I am deeply wounded with something, or I have a very strong standard in an area. So an example of a strong standard could be something along the lines of, I don't like my partner flirting. I don't like my partner sleeping around. Again, everybody has different set of standards on these things. So there's no judgment here, okay? But what I want you to recognize is that the other side may not have the same standard as you. So now you look at it more as something that you are very transparent about right at the beginning stages of the relationship, as something that you are non-negotiable on. Or if you are in relationship with this person and you find that a deeper wounding in you has been triggered, then it is, in true intimacy, it's the right and the appropriate thing, better word is appropriate thing for you to do is to actually own up to that and say, I am deeply wounded here, and I'm taking ownership of that I'm deeply wounded, and I would do my inner work, and I would appreciate you having my back, and I will give you the same in return. So this attitude of being really open and vulnerable around some of the deeper wounds which you haven't yet worked through will go really far in a relationship, where you're not judging the other side, but rather allowing and giving them your wholehearted, open permission to be who they are without you imposing your standards onto them, but at the same time recognizing that it is you who has the standard, and it's not a good or a bad thing that you have a standard, and neither is it a good or a bad thing that the other side has a different set of standards. Now, when you can start to approach your relationships in this manner, you will start to find that you open up your heart to invite the other person to step into their authenticity, to be unashamedly themselves. And when you can hold space for a person in this way, that's a real game changer in a relationship. And that also means that in the beginning of the relationship, you do have to take care. If this is where you want to go in your life, in your relationships, then you do have to take care to put on your thinking hat, do your judgments, and make sure that the partner that you are going to be with is the right partner who is going to want this type of relationship. Have a good day.